So we have all these eating instincts, but of course, as babies grow, eating gets more and more complicated. So initially, it's about mastering that suck, swallow, and breathe rhythm that newborns need in order to bottle feed or breastfeed. And then as they get a little bit older, it's about learning how to manipulate a spoon, how to manipulate a bite in their mouth, starting to chew, the pincer grip kicks in. When all of this is working well, it looks effortless. It looks like babies go from bottle feeding or breastfeeding to the 3-year-old pouring their own Cheerios, and it all just kind of happens. Parents don't have to think about it very much. But if you don't have these early learning experiences, it doesn't happen. Eating is instinctive, but it's a fragile instinct, and we can disconnect from it very, very easily. So that's where we were with Violet. What we figured out in those first weeks at home, as we began to understand just how entrenched this fear of eating was, she had developed something known as an oral aversion. And this is where babies learn to kind of connect the experience of eating, or really anything coming near their mouth, with pain and trauma and fear. And in Violet's case, we don't know, was it those first few weeks of trying to breastfeed when she was so weak and she was struggling to breathe and get enough oxygen? Was it that day in the hospital when she was intubated while she was still conscious, or all the other interventions she experienced during that stay? But I do think it was also Dan and me at home trying to feed her every 3 hours while she fought us, while she was terrified, and we didn't recognize it. It was that forced feeding that we were doing out of love and desperation. And that was reaffirming that oral aversion. So for Violet, not eating felt like an act of survival. But of course, we all know not eating is no way to survive. So just to go over some of what I've talked about, we have the eating instincts, which are hunger and fullness, but also comfort. And then we also have the eating behaviors that I talked about, all those physical behaviors of the oral mechanics that have to come into play for children to learn how to eat. But we also have a lot of psychological and cultural behaviors around food. And this is things like, where do we eat in our house? Is it always at the table? Is it in front of the TV? What times a day do we eat? Which foods does our family serve? And does our family believe are important for kids to eat or for ourselves to eat? And how does eating make us feel? What emotional state are we in when we're doing it? And how do we feel afterwards? And all of that is absorbed from our food culture. So this photograph is by a photographer named Lois Bielefeld, who I interviewed for the book. She has this really incredible series called Weeknight Dinners, where she actually goes into families' homes on random weeknights and just shoots them eating their family meal, just however they actually do it. And I love it because I think we all have these kind of leave it to Beaver ideas about what family dinners look like. And then you see what it really is, you're just getting dinner on the table, or in this case, not even on the table. It's just how it happens in your house. And so they're really great photographs. And what I also love is you can really see this family's food culture. You can see all of their ideas about what's a good food or a bad food, or how kids should eat, kind of all coming into play. Exposure to food culture starts really, really early. This is all of the messages we get on a daily basis around food from so many different sources. And young children are getting them, babies are getting them. Obviously, your first source of your food culture is your parents, as I said. It's how your parents are feeding you day in, day out. Other family members, babies watch their older siblings eat, grandma feeds them, aunts and uncles, all these other people who are around them daily. And then as kids get a little bit older, very quickly, they start learning a lot about food from their friends. I think the kind of classic example of this is a lot of parents feel like they have a toddler who eats anything, and then they start preschool and come home and just suddenly know green vegetables are terrible. I don't know how the kids give each other that memo, but it comes about pretty quickly. School is also a huge source of food culture, because teachers and lunch ladies, cafeteria aides, they have to get kids through snacks and meals every day in a semi-organized fashion. And so they're imparting a lot about how do we eat, table manners, how do we behave at the table. But they, of course, have their own ideas about good foods and bad foods and nutrition, and the kids are getting those messages too. This is when we started hearing things like, oh, you have to finish your fruit before you can have your cookie. Those kinds of things come home from school. Doctors are also a huge source of food culture. And this is problematic. Dr. Crawford and I were talking about this earlier. Doctors don't really learn anything about nutrition in medical school, but they're held up as experts on nutrition. And so when a parent is worried about a kid's eating, or if you are worried about your eating or your weight, your doctor or your pediatrician is like often your first port of call, where they may bring up weight and food to you, whether you've asked them or not. And so they have a lot of input on how kids feel about food. And then, of course, we have the media. And I say this as someone who's very much a part of the media and who's spent a lot of time thinking about how influential the media is. You know, this is showing up, it's of course things like magazines and newspapers and television advertising, but it's also social media now. It's everything in our Instagram feeds, on Facebook, all the videos that get shared with all the food messages that you see. And there's a dichotomy in the messaging that we get around food from the media. Because on the one hand, you have food marketing, which is all about buy more, eat more, consume more. And then on the other hand, you have diet marketing, which is all about eat less. That's a bad food. You can't have that. Eat in this restricted way that I'm going to explain to you. And so all of this is kind of swirling around us at all times, but it's all coming down to kids really early. So by the time a child reaches their first birthday and is having that birthday cake, they're picking up on some level how everyone feels about that. Is everyone excited to see them eat the cake? Is someone horrified because the cake has a lot of sugar and maybe the baby shouldn't have sugar? You know, what is the message about did the mom even make a cake with sugar? Or is it something else? Like, all of these messages about food are coming to kids right away.